First of all, I just want to go through a few of the products that I have out, but if I've forgotten something or there's something particular you want covered that I didn't, then just ask and I'm more than happy to help. So first of all, I want to talk about the StazOn ink pads, and the blends. So these are the two products we have that are alcohol based. So you may have seen that around and you're not quite sure what it means. What it means is that the pigment, how do I say that? The medium that carries the pigment in these products is isopropyl alcohol as opposed to water. So the liquid in this ink pad and in these markers is isopropyl alcohol. Okay, now then, I'll just slide those over. Then we have the Memento Black and all of our standard, now I've lost count in my head. Are there 50 colors, I believe? All of these, so the Memento are 50 colors. The Stampin' Write markers, which are the smaller round markers, these are all suspended in water. Okay, so those ink pads, these markers are water. The StazOn ink pads and the Stampin' Blends are suspended in isopropyl alcohol. So the first thing that people always wonder is about coloring. So say you want to stamp out this beautiful flower from the Poppy Moments stamp set. So, and you want to color it with your Stampin' Blends. Well, which ink pad do you use? It's a good question. So basically, you don't want to use an ink pad and your coloring medium that are the same. So if you want to use Stampin' Blends, which are alcohol-based, then you need to stamp it with a water-based ink. Probably the black, but you could also use the gray or dark blue or a brown. In that way, using the blends is actually really awesome because you can then stamp your outline in any of like 50, 55 colors, something like that. Now, if you want to color them in with the water-based markers or an aqua painter, which kind of tells you in the name is water in the barrel, or a blender pen. Well, actually, the blender pen's sort of an unknown, actually. So if you want to use if you want to watercolor it or use a water-based medium, then you need to stamp it in the opposite or an alcohol-based ink. Okay, so your outline and your coloring method need to be opposite. Okay. Now the blender pen, I said, is sort of an unknown. I actually spent some time and looked online, and all it says is that it's a blending solution. I couldn't find anywhere where it said if it was alcohol-based or water-based. However, I think if you're quite careful, you could probably use this with any of them because it's not overly wet one way or the other. I don't know. It's a little bit of an unknown. Now, then the other way you can do an outline is with your Versamark and your embossing powders. So basically, if you stamp with Versamark and then use any of your embossing powders, doesn't matter what color, you've basically sealed it completely. So you can use any coloring medium that you want. Okay, so that it becomes like completely waterproof, alcohol proof, everything proof. It's because it's now an enclosed plastic. Okay, so another little technique is I've just got a little sentiment stamp and some Whisper White here. One thing that sometimes we like to do is stamp using our markers. So if you wanted, like this stamp, where's the thing? It says hugs, prayers, and love. And maybe you just wanted to have hugs and prayers. So if you wanted to omit something, sometimes you want to color on it rather than stamping directly into like the whole thing into an ink pad. So let's try that. So we'll just grab this one. So you would use the brush tip of your water-based marker and just color on directly onto the rubber. And then we'll grab Rococo Rose. We'll just do hugs and prayers. Or maybe you don't even want to omit something. Maybe you just want them in different colors. Okay. Then you'll just stamp that down. And you'll see that you've got that now in 2 different colors, which is a cool technique. So the question I often get is, can you use the blends for that? Well, I would like for you to think of your Stampin' Blends like Sharpies or like permanent markers. So you would not take a black permanent marker and draw a color on your rubber and expect it to transfer, because the fact is you expect it to be permanent, and that's exactly what these are. So no, you cannot use these to color on your stamp and stamp. You can only use the water-based ones for that particular technique. Hopefully that makes sense as to why, because these will dry permanently and very, very quickly. These are suspended in water, and of course the rubber doesn't absorb the water, so it's just sitting there, at least for a period of time, so you can go ahead and stamp with them. Okay, another thing you can do is use, let's see, let me grab maybe like the watercolor paper, and I'll stamp in StazOn so that it's permanent. Now the other thing to note is that because this is alcohol based, if you've worked with isopropyl alcohol at all, or are familiar with it, I should say, you know that it evaporates and dries very quickly, which is a great characteristic of that for things like the markers and stuff, because then you can color on, say, like your pearls that don't absorb color, but it dries very quickly even just on the surface. But for that reason, because they dry so quickly, I'm just going to grab my pearls, is that you don't want to have the lid off of these alcohol-based ink pads or your alcohol-based markers. You want to do what you're going to do and then put the lids back on very quickly. So if we wanted to use our water-based, I'll just do one little section, like our water-based markers on this. Now they're not bleeding together because this is an alcohol-based outline and a water-based coloring. Oopsies. Oh, the lid wasn't quite on that. But you can take like your aqua painter then and just move that color. Okay, because the aqua painter is water-based and the marker is water-based. So you can just lay down a little bit of color with your markers and then move it. Now it doesn't blend as well as, say, the blender pens, but what I would do is just let that dry and maybe put on another layer and then just keep moving it. But when you have water-based anything and an aqua painter, actually these are being discontinued and we're getting new ones, and I don't think they're called aqua painters, but it will be a similar concept. I think just that they've improved the tips, but I haven't actually seen one yet. But anyway, you can then keep moving the color as long as you are using the same water, the same medium as your color. So if you're using water-based markers, you can use then water to keep moving the color. Same thing with, now this will be a very strange flower if I'm using 2 different colors. The water-based ink, I'm just squeezing the lid against, the ink pad against the lid. If you're using the water-based ink, you can then use the aqua painter, which has water in it, and move that color quite easily. And you can see that my outline is just staying put because it's alcohol-based. Hopefully this is making sense. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but feel free to ask questions. Okay, so I know that's a weird looking flower. It's the wrong, those pinks do not go together even a little bit, but I just wanted to demonstrate some ways that you can use. Some people have wondered, well, I have fallen in love with my blends and I just use them all the time. I don't even use these anymore. Well, just remember that these ones are good for actually stamping with your stamp, and also that you can use them for watercoloring purposes as well as just straight coloring and writing purposes. Okay, now another coloring medium we have are the, if I can get them out of the box, the watercolor pencils. I should have stamped 2 of those flowers. So as you can probably guess, the watercolor pencils move or blend with water. So of course we want to stamp the outline with StazOn, or use Versamark and an embossing powder to completely encapsulate that into, or to make it waterproof. Let's choose something other than pink. Let's go for the purple. So with the watercolor pencils, there's several ways you can use them. I like to kind of do a dark outline or all along one side. I'm not actually that great at coloring. I just sort of get the impression of what I'm trying to do. And then the watercolor pencils are great because they just kind of almost like melt under the water. Or you can even just take your aqua painter right onto the pencil and, oh, that's blue. Goodness gracious. I thought I was doing purple again. Now we're going to have some, if someone's coming on right now, you might wonder, what in the world is she doing? I'm just trying to give some demonstrations. I'm not necessarily creating something. Oh, there's the purple one. Okay, so you get that idea. So the watercolor pencils need to be blended with water. Therefore, any outline that you do needs to be with an alcohol-based ink. Okay, then the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the different sort of papers. So first we have, oops, let's just move that. First we have just our plain Whisper White paper. Our Whisper White paper will, basically you can stamp on that with any of our inks and it will look great. However, the Whisper White is actually the best thing to use with your Stampin' Blends, with the alcohol markers. However, it does not perform really well with a lot of water on it. You could do a little bit, like just like one little brush of water, but it will start to bubble and buckle if you're doing like a full-on watercolor scene or something. It just won't do well. And I'm talking about if you're using like an aqua painter. If you want to use markers, you know, that works great. It doesn't, it actually, the color is very, very vibrant. I guess I'm more talking about if you're putting on a lot of water, like with one of these. So that's where a blender pen comes in too. If you wanted to have a watercolor look and it needed to be on the white, just because sometimes the other papers aren't like a pure white, then you could use your blender pen if you wanted to watercolor a scene. It won't look quite the same. So let me just give you an example. And we'll pull out even another color. We'll pull out the pink. So this is what, you know, watercoloring looks like, that sort of a look. Whereas if I used, let's see, I'll just do it the exact same way so you can see the difference. If I use the blender pen, it's similar, but it looks more like a marker. Okay, so it doesn't have like that watercolory brushy look. It looks more like a soft marker. So there's nothing wrong with it at all, but if you want to do a watercolor look on Whisper White, you'd need to use a blender pen as opposed to an aqua painter or a brush with water in it. Okay, now then there is this other paper called Shimmer White, and you probably can't see it on the video, but it's a little less white, a little bit slightly more vanilla, but not as yellow as vanilla, and it has a little bit of a sparkle to it. But because it has a finish on it, then it takes water much better than Whisper White. So you absolutely can watercolor on this one. So I do suggest you have some of this in your stash. It's beautiful anyway because it's just got that tiny bit of sparkle to it, which is just a little something more. So you can use your aqua painter on there, you can use your blender pen on there, you can use your markers, you can use your Stampin' Blends, you can use basically anything and everything on this. So if you wanted to do like a watercolor wash, which is something I like to do quite often, what you do is you get your paper a little bit wet And I don't know why I'm using Melon Mambo, but it was just the top of the pile. And you can then just move that color quite well. Whereas if I did this on Whisper White, it just wouldn't, the color wouldn't move. Where I put it first, it would just kind of stay there or be extremely dark in that one spot. So this one is, it's just a really good paper to have in your stash. It is more expensive than the Whisper White, but I think you kind of need both, because the white, obviously you use the white and the vanilla all the time, but this one, when you want to do techniques and stuff, sometimes this is the only one that works really well. And then we have, this is what I was using before, watercolor paper. So this is proper not professional grade, maybe artist grade, probably more like it, paper that has quite a lot of cotton in it, which means that you can use all the water you want. You could even take it to the sink and like dunk it in water and it won't, well, I suppose eventually it would fall apart, but you know, it just, you can do anything to this. You can use the blends, you can use your aqua painter, you can do 10, 15 layers all over it, over and over, letting it dry in between, of course, and it will just take it. Now, this one is, again, more expensive than any of the other ones, but sometimes this is the only thing that is going to actually come out with the effect that you want. But it is, again, so there's the white, there's the shimmer paper, and there's the watercolor paper. So they are slightly different colors. So sometimes that makes your decision. You think, well, those don't look good. The white's the only thing that looks good. Therefore, I am limited to using blends or using a blender pen. So then sometimes that kind of makes your decision of what you're going to use. And then the last medium is vellum. Now we don't, well, at least I don't use it that often, but when you do use it, you can use heat embossing, but keep in mind that this paper is very thin and it has a waxy coating, so it may melt somewhat or at least start buckling if you do too much. You can use the blends. It actually works quite well with the blends and with Stays. Actually, StazOn is probably the only ink you can use on this. Because it's quite waxy, these water-based inks will just sit on the top of it and they won't actually soak in and dry, so they just aren't really that good of a choice. So StazOn's the only ink you can use. You can use blends. However, let me just grab this. Let me just show you. If you stamp the flower, okay, great, it looks good. And it's stamped very clearly. But as I explained in the beginning, if you stamp with an alcohol-based ink, then if you color with an alcohol-based ink, then they're going to bleed together because they're the same base, if that makes sense. So what you can do with vellum, though, is turn it over to the back, and then you can color on the back. Now then, of course, on the front, you're going to get more of a muted color than you would normally, but it is a way that you can color with your blends and stamp with the alcohol-based ink and not have them bleed together, because you can't really use these on the vellum for the same reason, because they're water-based, so they're just going to sit on the top and they might dry, but it might take like a day or maybe even longer. I've never had the patience to try and get that to work. So with vellum, because it's like a wax paper, you have to use these two products, but you'll have to do one on one side and one on the other side. Okay, so that was probably the long way of explaining that. So I think that's all the info that I had written down that I wanted to share. However, I just want to tell you that if you go to my website, which is stamphappy.co.nz or stamphappy.co.nz if you are watching from North America, then across the menu, across the top, or it might be a drop-down menu bar depending on what kind of device you're on, there is an option called Stamping Resources. And on there I have basically a sheet that you can print off, a one-pager that explains the different inks. And I believe then there is another sheet that explains also all the different papers and what works on what. And the one with the inks explains what works together and what doesn't. So that might be a great thing to print off. And there's a whole lot of other things that I've sort of put up and collected over the years over there as well. And I didn't see any questions come through, but if you're all watching the replay, or if you shut this down and think of something, please do ask. I am really thrilled to help people out and explain things, so it's my pleasure. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and happy crafting, and let me know if I can help you out in any way. I'll talk to you later. Good night.